This podcast may contain explicit language. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique rating style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
We also welcome back our returning celebrity guest, co-host of the War Starts at Midnight podcast. You know him from his previous appearances on Gone Girl, Parasite, and now Fight Club. Please welcome back Peterson W. Hill.
Excited to be back.
Welcome back into the chair yet again. Back in the arena.
Hair wasn't even cooled off before you got back in.
Oh, I'm going to have to keep rowing. Keeps you alive.
Yeah. We chain you to your oar. We also welcome in our newest celebrity guest, critic for In Session Film. Please welcome Kristin Battestella.
Thank you, Thomas. It's very nice to be here.
Well, thank you for joining us. Unfortunately, that means you are subject to our new guest questions. So the first one up, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and why you love movies.
Yes, I write at InSessionFilm.com. I'm also on the Women in Session podcast there. We've been doing that for about 3 years now, I think. You've had some other friends and family from there as well. Where else do I work? We've been doing a lot of guest podcasts also as well, which has been really wild and crazy. That's really exciting. And my main blog is there for review. My handle on Twitter. Also now Blue Sky. So trying to spread the film love a little bit everywhere.
Excellent. The dreaded second question. What is your favorite movie and why?
That's not a dread to me. I will talk about my favorite movie to anybody who listens. My favorite film is The Searchers.
Okay. I was not expecting that.
No, discourse on Twitter, I've been very frustrated when people going, I had to see that in film school and I didn't like it so much. I'm like, really? Baloney? Like, no, listen, learn, study, Ford, Scorsese says for a reason. So yeah, I will constantly talk about The Searchers with anybody who listens.
Well, we may have to bring you back for that one because we have not yet covered it. I don't think it comes up for anniversary until 2 years from now.
Oh, wow.
But even so.
Okay. I will be, our friend Andrew, I will be doing 1956 on the Revisionist Almanac.
Ah, yes.
I flat out said, I've got some complaints with that year. The Searchers did not win anything. Let's go.
Yes, around the world in 80 days.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unimpeachable masterpiece, right?
Mm-hmm.
Final question. What makes a good movie for you?
I'm not interested in a lot of the superficiality that we have today. I really need to have something compelling. To me, it's almost like a book. Like, even if you've had a bad experience with a book, once you read it from beginning to end, you've gained something. You've changed from what you've experienced. And I think that great film has the quality to do the same thing. That you should be able to experience a film and just be so moved by it that, it stays with you, that it never leaves you. So I'm looking for deep, complex things. Doesn't mean I can't have a good time with a movie, but something that's just, today's banal, formulaic. I'm like, keep it.
Well, let's hope that you found that in this week's film. So let's jump right into it. But tonight, for our 237th episode, we discuss another epic Best Picture winner in Ben-Hur for its 65th anniversary. Directed by William Wyler, written by Carl Thunberg, music by Miklos Rosa, starring Charlton Heston as Judah Ben-Hur, Jack Hawkins as Quintus Arias, Haya Hararit as Esther, Stephen Boyd as Messala, Hugh Griffith as Sheik Ilderim, Martha Scott as Miriam, Kathy O'Donnell as Tirza. Dad, can you name the other Best Picture winner that Kathy O'Donnell was in?
Years of Our Lives. She was the girlfriend to Homer, the amputee.
That is correct. Sam Jaffe as Simonides, Finlay Curry as Balthazar, Frank Thring as Pontius Pilate, Terence Longden as Drusus, George Relf as Tiberius Caesar, and Andre Morel as Sextus. Can I get that as a nickname?
I don't know who would ever call you that.
Sextus Mostus?
Isn't it just Latin for six? So did they literally just name him like, hey, you're our sixth kid, you're sextist?
Well, Sextus is much different than sexist, but okay.
I took Latin for 2 years and I don't remember.
Me too.
Well, that's fine. That makes up for all of my Spanish that I recall. But anyway, recognition for this movie. Ben-Hur was released on November 18th, 1959. On a budget of roughly $15 million, the film would have a resounding success to reach over $146 million in its initial release, making it by far the highest-grossing film of 1959 with more than double the next closest film that year. The film would also make an additional $20 million in profits from the merchandising accompanying the film. Critics were almost all positive with a few nitpicks, but Ben-Hur would go on to be nominated for a record at the time 12 Oscars, winning 11, which is still a record, tied with what two other films? Anybody know?
Titanic and Lord of the Rings.
Very good, Peterson.
Yeah.
Of the 11 that it won for Best Picture, Director for William Wyler, Actor for Charlton Heston, Supporting Actor for Hugh Griffith, the most unusual winner that I can think of, Art Direction Color, Cinematography Color, Costume Design Color, Film Editing, Sound Recording, Score for Musical or Comedy, and Special Effects, and it only lost for Adapted Screenplay. In 1971, the film made its TV debut in a 5-hour special. It was one of the highest-rated movies ever screened on television at the time, behind only two others, behind the broadcast premiere of The Birds and Bridge on the River Kwai. For the AFI, Ben-Hur has appeared at number 72 on their 100 Movies list from 1998, number 49 on the 100 Thrills list, number 21 on the Film Scores list, 56 on the 100 Cheers list, and number 2 on AFI's 10 Top 10 Epic Film list. The film was included by the Vatican in a list of important films compiled in 1995 under the category of religion. It is the only Hollywood studio film to be included on that list. It was listed as number 491 on Empire's 500 Greatest Films of All Time, and in 2004, the National Film Preservation Board selected Ben-Hur for preservation by the National Film Registry. Ben-Hur currently holds an 87% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 90 score on Metacritic, and a 4 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So, as we start each week, Dad, what is your relationship to this film?
Well, I'm going to start by asking you to clarify. You said the year that it was first on broadcast television. What year was that?
1971.
I watched that with my parents.
I was not expecting this.
I happened while I was watching the film because I'd been seeing bits and pieces of it when we watched it together last year. And the scene where he goes down into the Valley of the Lepers, I remember that scene and watching it and my mom just sobbing.
Well, that holds to reason with the way you've talked about her and religious films or religious affiliated films like The Robe previously.
Yes. And so I was trying to remember back and I was going, okay, this had to be, I must have been about, 7 or 8 and watching this film. And that would have been it. So I will guarantee that I sat and watched this with my parents at that time. So that is my relationship with this film.
Interesting. Okay. Like I said, I was not expecting that, but much better story than I could have thought of. Actually tying in both of your parents for once instead of just your dad. But all right.
I think my dad was a little more indifferent, but I think it was like, all right, I like movies. I'll sit here and watch it with her.
Okay. Well, fair enough. I don't remember the exact specific time that I first saw this movie. I want to say it was in college. Like, I sat down and watched it as one of the Best Picture winners as I was kind of going through the list and checking all of them off. But I don't remember specifically, like, the first time seeing it. I think the second time I saw it was with you probably about like 8 years ago. And I remember specifically saying, God, this movie is so freaking hokey with all of its Jesus tie-ins. And I thought it was so contrived and bullshit that you're like, oh, well, of course Jesus would be there to present him water when he needs it most. Jesus is just going to appear.
Did you happen to read the synopsis of the novel? The novel,
No.
This is nothing compared to the novel.
Yeah.
The novel is like way out there.
Okay, so essentially Judah Ben-Hur is the Forrest Gump of the Old Testament.
Well, he's he kind of like becomes the person that like takes all of his fortune and buries all the martyred Christians in Rome afterwards in the Book of Acts. That's how it ends.
Huh.
Messala, life is like a box of chocolates.
Forrest Gump's not a bad comparison because Judah Ben-Hur has about as much characterization as Forrest does.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of understand what his overall passions and goals are, but he is passing contact through all of these important markers in Western canon, or some form of history. It's just like, how the hell would any one person have this many cross intersections of anything?
Row, Forrest, row.
I will say, this most recent version, the one I watched over the weekend, I actually really dug this film. I didn't find it nearly as hokey. I didn't find the tie-ins to be overly, like, overhanded, I guess is the way I would put it. So I actually enjoyed this a lot more this time, and I don't know why. So, Peterson, what is your relationship to the film?
So this is a movie that I saw clips of growing up all throughout childhood. Every Academy Awards ceremony, saw clips in like 6th grade, and then never watched it, but got to film school, and we watched 2 sequences. One is the rowing sequence, and really getting into the editing and rhythms of that sequence was what we studied, and then the chariot race, which is obviously the defining moment of this movie, really. And still put it on the back burner. I said, I'll watch this some other time. And then this record came up, the potential to do it. And I said, you know what? This is a good chance to kind of assign myself something that, because it's 4 hours long, I'm just not going to pop on. And it was a weird kind of feeling watching it, because I think it's very strange watching it from today's lens. Some of it works really, really well. I think things that don't are kind of the Christian propaganda or the Christian advertisement section of it. I think it's a little strange. But I will say, I watched this, and my daughter, when the kind of drums beating during the rowing sequence, she came in the room and she was like, "What are you watching?" I was like, "It's called Ben-Hur. I'm recording a podcast on it. You want to watch?" She said, "Sure." Sat down. She watched about 45 minutes to an hour, and then decided to go do other things. And then I told her to come back, and my son to come back and watch the chariot race. And they're both kind of like enthralled by that and taken in by it. So, my history of this movie is more of it being an object than my own personal rewatches and watchings of it.
So this is your first time?
First time. First full time watching it. Yeah.
Ben-Hur virgin. All right.
Yep.
I guess that's religious in nature, kind of Christianity adjacent. But Kristin, you've already shown us your box set off air.
Yeah. The giant.
So you must have a long-standing relationship to this movie,
I
particularly given you were the first volunteer for this episode.
Oh, I was? Oh, wow. No, yeah, I loved this as a kid. I don't know, I liked all the biblical epics for some reason. And I guess having a VCR at the time, I guess, was what was really special. And, because we only had like 3 channels, a couple small TVs, some black and white TVs, and we had the double-decker VHS of this. I think I liked the 10 Commandments and like Samson and Delilah, the robe more, because I feel like I taped those off TV so I could just watch those straight through like all the time. But Ben-Hur, it was like my father would be like, no, you have to change the tapes. And like even The Godfather, those big double-decker VHSs where I would only watch the first part. I love Sonny. It cuts when he gets hit. And one day my mother said to me, put in the second tape of The Godfather. And I was like, oh my God, wow. So the chariot race is on the second tape. My dad would be like, no, okay, get up and change the tapes. We're watching Ben-Hur. And even my husband said that now, like, oh, this Blu-ray is still 2 discs. And I said, you don't understand, man. You don't understand. So no, I loved this. And I mean, you know, and I've gone back and forth because, you know, I do like the religious aspect of it, but I feel like you can totally watch this film like without the religious part. And, you know, the book is a chore. You know, I read that a long time ago, and the movie, for as long as it is, doesn't even cover the whole book. And even it's the subtitle, A Tale of Christ. And you're like, okay, your story's about Judah. Like, okay, like the Jesus stuff's like all the little extra stuff. So thematically, I do feel the film is uneven, that there are problems with it that I can see. And even rewatching this again, I was like, you know, the leper stuff, like, okay, you know, the extra women stuff that they add on, I'm like, they could have kept all that. If they had just made it, like, I'm surprised nobody's ever done like a for TV edited version, because it's like, if you could like streamline this, it would just be even more perfect. But yet I'm still like, darn it, this miracle stuff is getting to me. I had little tears, and my cat came up in my face like, no, oh my God, like, you know, rubbing my face, everything. It's okay. And I'm like, damn it, this movie did it again. You know, so I do think there are certainly definitely powerful moments. It does have flaws to it. But, you know, my parents love it. And I do feel like it is something that keeps on giving the more you watch it.
Has anybody seen the remake?
No. Well, technically, this is a remake.
Yeah.
I know there's
a
was it 2025 or 24?
That's actually included in this set.
Yeah. So.
How long is the silent film?
It's over like 2 hours. Silent films are one extreme or the other. They're like, you have the ones that are like the 10, 15 minute, like one reels. And you have the ones that are like 70 minutes. And then you've got, ones that are like 2.5 hours.
Your Births of a Nation.
Yeah, the older 10 Commandments too.
Well, Births of a Nation's 3+.
Yeah, it's like close to 4.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The original title of this was Circumcision of a Nation, but that was different.
Mm-hmm.
So, Dan apparently alluded to this question already, but what is the movie about?
I don't think that the movie necessarily knows what it's about.
Betrayal, survival, redemption, forgiveness.
That's kind of what I focused on. I thought it was more vengeance and forgiveness.
Yeah, I think it's all, to me, it's the story of Judah Ben-Hur. And I think you can kind of cut out the first, 20 minutes in the last like 45. and you tell the story of Ben-Hur, and you put it right at like 2:30, 2:45. And I think it's a really powerful story. But I was struck by watching this, how similar like story beats are to Gladiator.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Truly crazy how similar these movies are. I mean, up to like just how Maximus and Gladiator kind of moves through that movie. It's very similar.
I definitely had the same thought.
But the way you're the virgin, so you're looking at this going, Ben-Hur, this is copying Gladiator.
Well, I mean, of course I knew Ben-Hur came first, but I think one of the things that Gladiator does successfully is that it tells a pretty similar story and kind of does cut out the Christ stuff. Yeah. And it leaves you with that 2.5 hour, pretty like lean, muscular film.
Well, it's the difference between, I mean, even though Gladiator had like a lot of rewrites or something along the way, like you can definitely tell the difference. And the way this is nominated for adapted, but it's the one it doesn't win. So you can definitely tell there's like a lot of script problems in their adaptation and who was credited. Because you look at this like, yeah, if this would have done another revision, because I mean, you get like the water, thirst, vengeance metaphors, like let's go with that. Like, so you don't need to keep having these extra reinforcements, these extra characters, these extra scenes. So yeah, you can definitely see the difference between, okay, a pared down movie.
The Sheik scene is probably one too many as far as added characters, and Balthazar doesn't really need to be there. They extend the Christ sequence way too long. The leprosy thing drags on for much longer than it really needs to be. There are a lot of things that could have been trimmed down in the editing, as far as my taste. I don't think that detracts from where I thought this was. Again, if you were to ask me 8 years ago, I thought this thing was frickin' hokey and was all over the place and didn't hold it together, but it had decent set pieces. For whatever reason, this time I watched it, I found it endearing.
I mean, one of the writers who was the main contributor to the last script was Gore Vidal. And he himself admitted that he wrote the opening scene between Messala and Judah as being a gay reunion from their teen years. And actually, he disclosed that to William Wyler, and he said, well, I can see that, and I think it works. Except don't say anything to Chuck, he'll freak out.
I mean, there certainly is a kind of spurned lover aspect to this film. I mean, I was very kind of once Messala comes into the picture and you're watching that story, I was pretty compelled. Like, I was very on board with that, and then he gets sent away, and I was like, this thing's cooking with gas.
Yeah.
And then it stops, once an hour and just slows down to a halt. And there's a couple times too where, he gets to Rome and they're like, oh, this guy, Judah Ben-Hur, he's the great chariot racer. We're like, what? We haven't seen him race a single chariot. We've just seen him talk about it.
I mean, that's the difference between what would happen now and what would happen then. They put in more action sequences and set pieces, but given what we're going to talk about in probably the Did You Know section as to the logistics of setting up that one chariot race, I'm not surprised that they didn't do any minor ones.
Oh, no, yeah. I don't,
but he doesn't need all those little extra talking moments, though, either. It's like, yeah, I Claudius did that. Like, oh, yeah, a few sound effects. Yeah, they're watching gladiators, but they're really talking over here, getting to the meat of their story. But, okay, you've got the opening of Christ and Messala walking in. Okay, he's arrived at Rome. But then you're with Judah. So every time they break away from, a couple Romans talking, or when they've got just the women and the leper stuff, you're like, why are we seeing scenes without Judah? Let's stick with him. That's where your story is.
Yeah, overall, I think most of, frankly, any of these epics of the period could probably be trimmed down. They were made this long intentionally because, and I guess it's one thing that was related to me to a recent book I read for our appearance on the 1967 episode of the Revisionist Almanac, where they were talking about the roadshow pictures, I guess, that I had no concept of, that would be touring things. They would go around and it would be this whole big ordeal to see a 4-hour movie with a true overture in it and all this other mechanical moving pieces around with it. It would be an event. You would be it was like the circus coming to town type of thing. It was this movie would come in and you'd see it multiple times over. Well, that plays into the length. Nowadays, everybody's like, oh, I want to be into a movie for 2 hours, maybe 2.5, and then I want to go out. I want to do other stuff. I want to hit up the bar. I want to go have dinner, whatever. I want to go home and sleep. Any of those number of things. Now we're constantly complaining about film lengths.
This is still the age where we had A and B films, and this would cover both.
Yeah.
You just wouldn't have a B film. You'd have your A film and your B film, but this time, this film is the A and the B. So this is your whole evening.
Yeah, the B film was the last 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, and now studios are so concerned with hitting a certain length because once you hop over that 3-hour mark, you lose time slots in the day and chances for people to come see it. So unless you're, Avengers Endgame.
Yeah.
I don't know. Was that movie 3 hours or a little over?
Yeah, I think it's 3 hours and 6 minutes or something like that.
Jesus. So you have something like that, and inevitably you're going to lose screens. But
something like Avengers, they knew people would go see.
Yes.
Well, right. And to be quite honest, I don't think there's a whole lot to that movie that you're going to cut.
Mm-hmm.
To Avengers?
Yeah, in Endgame, because you're wrapping up 23, 24 films. Yeah. There's not a frame of that I would really cut.
But even ironically here, I said the scenes that I would complain about where they're talking too much. Now you're kind of I can leave it play in the background, okay, it's fine.
But your complaint about this movie, Peterson, that you're having is similar to the one that I make about Dances with Wolves. You cut out the first half an hour and the last half an hour, and it's a much better film.
Mm-hmm. I can't believe there's a director's cut of that that's even longer.
Yeah.
What more could you possibly have to say?
Well, that's just Kevin Costner being masturbatory.
Did you watch American Horizon, any of you?
No. Hell no.
Okay.
I thought
So-
the same thing. Like, I looked at this and I thought, yeah, this is going to end up just being stuck on TV, and this is exactly what happened. So
The end of American Horizon Part 1 literally
Spoilers.
ends. No.
Spoilers.
It
3,
ends-
2, 1, go.
It ends with a trailer for the second movie.
Fuck.
It's like,
That is hilarious. So obviously, given the pedigree of this thing, should this be considered one of the great Oscar winners of all time?
I still think so. Yeah. And there are a couple of wins I have problems with. You're like, really? This is what won for it? But the technical achievements, definitely.
Yeah, I think as far as an epic goes, you can't argue with the sophistication of the direction and the set pieces and the production value of what's going on. I mean, I think there are definitely arguments to be made for some of the acting. Like Charlton Heston, he's fine in this movie. I don't know if he deserved Best Actor. I wouldn't know because I haven't compared him against everybody else from that year. And Andrew, do not take this as a sign that I want to do the year 1959, even though I probably do. But I'm not going to have time anytime soon. So just cool it a little bit here. But ultimately, I do think that there's more grand about this movie, particularly at the time that it was made, than could detract from it, even though I think 1959 is arguably one of the best years ever in film.
if I was in a theater in 1959, I'd probably be real excited for this thing. Like, I would leave thinking it was a huge statement in a way.
Yeah. And if you want our rankings of some of our favorite film years of all time, there is a previous episode of this show that you can do so.
And this is after the 10 Commandments. So you would think the audience would have been tired of big films like this, but obviously they weren't.
Well, when was that? Was 52, right?
10 Commandments was 56, I want to say.
Oh, it was a little later. Okay, it was 56.
55,
And
56.
the Robe was
yeah,
53.
But the Robe is after,
And
right?
But you're talking also about these are the bloated musical eras too, which also served a similar purpose. Think about all the films that are around it. Bridge on the River Kwai. We're talking about Dr. Zhivago, Lawrence of Arabia, My Fair Lady, Sound of Music, Gigi, A West Side Story. You've got a lot of these in there. This is that era where everything was you had to be 3+ hours.
Yeah, I guess West Side Story is the next year, and that's 2.5.
No, The Apartment's the next year. West Side Story's 2 years. It's 61. And then Lawrence, and then Tom Jones.
Who did Heston beat out for Best Actor that year?
Jack Lemmon for Some Like It Hot.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
James Stewart for Anatomy of a Murder.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. Samson and Delilah is 46 or 49, and at the time that was the highest grossing movie of the year. But a lot of people don't remember that one in the huge epicness, because now you're like, wow, Victor Mature as Samson, okay, and now now we're Charlton Heston is playing Judah Ben-Hur. It's very strange because, like you said, the hokey part. I mean, a lot of it is a lot of that 50s overacting. And yet part of you's maybe this is Charlton Heston at his best. And yet you're still kind of but there were just better people. But you're yes, he is the anchor of the story. He is we're kind of on this journey with him. So, was it the most memorable acting performance of the year? Maybe. I don't know.
Well, I think physically Heston is perfect for the role because
he definitely looks the part.
He looks the part, and he looks like somebody who will certainly, could outrow all those people. And he looks like he's just, he's a specimen.
Well, and I think he also had been trained through years of whatever you want to call it, cultural background, to be very hateful. And that's what this role requires. So on that note, Dad, do you have our plot summary ready for us?
Oh, I do. In an ancient world, nobleman Judah Ben-Hur is betrayed by his friend, Messala, a Roman officer, and is cast into slavery. Judah endures brutal hardships, fueled by a burning desire for vengeance. He rises through sheer will and becomes a skilled charioteer. Aided by Sheik Ilderim and his magnificent horses, In a climatic race, Judah defeats Messala, reclaiming his honor. Along his journey, he encounters the Nazarene, whose teachings of love and forgiveness transforms Judah's quest from one of retribution to spiritual awakening. Thus, Judah's tale becomes a timeless legend of courage, redemption, and grace.
Thank you. Did you know? The 300 sets built required 5 years of research and 14 months of labor. William Wyler kept up a 16 hours a day, 6 days a week schedule for the 9 months it took to shoot the film. Did you know? The chariot race required 15,000 extras on a set constructed on 18 acres of backlot at Cinecittà Studios outside Rome. Tour buses visited the set every hour. 18 chariots were built, with half being used for practice. The race took 5 weeks to film. Did you know? During the 18-day auction of MGM props, costumes, and memorabilia that took place in May 1970, when new studio owner Kirk Kerkorian was liquidating the studio's assets, a Sacramento restaurateur paid $4,000 for a chariot used in the film. 3 years later, during the energy crisis, he was arrested for driving the chariot on the highway. Did you know? The desert sequences were all set to be filmed in Libya until authorities in the country, a Muslim nation, realized that the film was promoting Christianity. The government ordered MGM out of the country, forcing the studio to shift filming to Spain, which has the only desert in Europe. Did you know? Kirk Douglas was offered the role of Messala but turned it down because he didn't want to play a second-rate baddie. Douglas wanted to play Judah Ben-Hur, whose Jewishness appealed to him, but he was too old and Charlton Heston had already been cast. The experience motivated Douglas to develop his own epic, Spartacus, which was partially designed to compete against this film. Did you know? A talent was a measurement of weight and could have meant either silver or gold, as each medal was measured in talents. In 2022 dollars, the sum wagered by Messala against the Sheik at 4-to-1 odds on 1,000 talents would have been the modern-day equivalent of approximately either $82 million in silver or $8 billion of gold. And so with that, we will take our first break, and we will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, next week for our 238th episode, we welcome back 5-time club member Sarah Duncan and new guest Liz Arnold of Liz and a Movie for another 2019 film in Knives Out for its 5th anniversary. Written and directed by Ryan Johnson, music by Nathan Johnson, starring Daniel Craig, Chris Evans, Anna de Armas, Jamie Lee Curtis, Michael Shannon, Don Johnson, Toni Collette, Lakeith Stanfield, and Christopher Plummer in his final role. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. All right, let's find out what's going on with our guests. Starting with you, Peterson. I know it's only been a week since the last time that you answered this question, but what are you working on and where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can catch me here. As well, it's psychodriving.com. And War Starts at Midnight. We've got a nice back catalog there you can check out. And then Twitter or X, Peterson W. Hill. Also on Blue Sky, which is probably going to be starting to transition more to Blue Sky. Seems like a wise choice these days. Yeah.
A lot less vitriol.
Yeah.
At least that's the feedback I'm getting. So.
Oh,
but,
Elon.
Yeah, well, he's an asshat, and now he's going to be probably running the FCC. But anyway, Kristin, what are you working on, and where can people find you?
I'm at Therefore Review on Twitter, yes, now also on Blue Sky. And, you know, I also do TV at Keith Loves Movies. I did a whole series on Jack Irish, and they announced that Alien TV show. And I was like, man, we needed, like, a Guy Pearce like Peter Wayland. Like, he's not musky, but he is kind of musky, you know, getting into space, searching for scary stuff. So, and yeah, so ditto segue. I had just done a piece on Demi Moore also at InSessionFilm.com. So a little bit of everywhere.
Excellent. All right, it's time for everybody's favorite segment. It's time for Ask Dana Anything. We do not have any listener submissions, so I turn to our guests. I know at least one of you has a question for my co-host.
I do, yeah. So Dana, I was wondering, let's take the lead, or maybe supporting actor of last week's film, Fight Club, Brad Pitt. Would you rather see Brad Pitt play Judah Ben-Hur or Charlton Heston play Tyler Durden?
I'd rather see Brad Pitt play Judah Ben-Hur.
Well, we have Troy.
Yeah, I was going to say, he's basically already done that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I just think that maybe it's growing up in the 80s with Heston going, "Pry this gun out of my cold, dead hand." I have a little problem with Chuck.
It keeps me up at night because, there's just some of his movies that I love so much, and how he had earlier been civil rights movement and all the early Screen Actors Guilds and everything. And then, yeah, and again, like me as a kid, yeah, the same thing. Like, this is the same dude. Like, really? Like, it keeps me up at night thinking,
Yeah.
Shame.
You never really know anybody, do you?
Mm-hmm.
I guess not.
So, any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, Peterson. All right, then let's go back to our regular programming. We left off at Best Performance. Dad, who do you have down?
I have William Wyler. Just the whole nature of having to control and all the moving parts and all the things that had to be done. I mean, this shouldn't have been Ben-Hur, should have been Hercules, because that's what it was for him to pull this off and do it this well.
And after the producer died, he had to carry on the production value too.
Mm-hmm. I guess I didn't realize that. Yeah,
it was a Zimbalist. He died before they were done.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with pretty much everything that you put there. I would add that I think it's even beyond some of the set pieces, because you're controlling some potentially temperamental actors, some of which don't have a huge amount of name value, but just even beyond the set pieces and all it took to do those. I mean, 5 weeks for the chariot race is exceptional in itself, but you have 2 major set pieces in the sea battle and the chariot race. But outside of that, the sets involved, the amount of extras that were involved, and even just some of the other pieces of this movie, it is the true definition of an epic. And the amount that it took for a guy that had won his first 2 Oscars for much smaller, much more contained movies, I have to give my hats off to him for what he accomplished in this.
And even The Big Country was right before this, but you're kind of like, yeah, it was a regular, not a studio Western, but, something that, yeah, you knew what you were getting into, even if you had, the big, they're in a canyon or something, but just a lot of, cowboys around. It was like, it was not on this scale at all.
Well, but compare him to his previous work with Mrs. Miniver or The Best Years of Our Lives. Those are just much more condensed, people in rooms talking movies. And this film does have moments of that. I do think that the film actually does well at times when you're focused on particularly people struggling, talking in rooms. It still has those moments, but he really stretches himself, kind of pre-Spielbergian essence, for how he's integrating all of the action set pieces with everything else that's going on in the transitions between.
Well, in every dialogue scene it's a backdrop of the most adorned room you've ever been in. I mean, those sets alone, they're just these gorgeous matte paintings and sets. Mm-hmm. So even if you're in a dialogue scene, it feels alive in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. I mean, seeing this especially on that Blu-ray where they completely restore the 70 millimeter. I mean, like I said, I don't like superficial films. So the idea of this depth of field, that people have to walk in and walk across, or people have to be from steps or come down or completely enter. There's enough time to see characters shadowed in the background, or the stiltedness of awkward kind of conversations. So it's there's still people are allowed to perform in scene instead of those scenes actually being over edited. They're not. They're allowed to play out naturally, and it's so crisp and it's so beautiful. And as we kind of poo poo, Heston winning this I think is one of the best director awards like ever. Like, if you want to understand what best direction is, it's Ben-Hur.
I would point out also that this was done with Wyler being what would be the equivalent of legally deaf. He lost his hearing doing film documentaries for the Army Air Corps during World War II, flying in B-17s and filming. And so he had to have a lot of assistance, and he had to have somebody helping him hear what was going on a lot of times around him.
So I assume that both of you agree on best performance, it's Wyler?
Well, I would put a shout out for Messala.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clearly William Wyler. I mean, there's no other way to go with this, I think.
As far as best secondary performance, I'll take the unenviable route and go Charlton Heston. Again, I do think that he's actually married pretty well to the part, and it doesn't require him to stretch more of what his actual skill is. This is not a movie where he has to be anything other than really Charlton Heston. But because he was a relative unknown going into this movie, he doesn't have to be anything else, and so he can become Ben-Hur without you necessarily tying something else in with him.
An unknown? He did the 10 Commandments before this.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, because he even says that to people, like, yeah, I did do 2 biblical movies, but the other's King of Kings. He's like, Judah is not a biblical character. Everybody kind of expected it from him by that point.
Other best secondaries?
Like I said, I like Messala. But the thing about Heston is, like, even after this, it's like, yeah, what else could he do? And in some ways, I almost think he kind of became a better actor when he did things like Planet of the Apes or like Soylent Green, because they were different, edgy kind of parts. Like this, he kind of does what he's expected. But I don't know. I mean, obviously he's the secondary lead, but like in some ways, to me, Stephen Boyd kind of steals the show. Like this is his kind of crowning achievement. Like what else did he do? Fantastic Voyage. So I think that the idea, the yin and yang of Messala kind of against, like he's the Vader that starts this vengeance in the first place. And some of the things he says are really twisted in like those Gore Vidal, like dialogue scenes where he's the oppressor and he's making it seem like Judah has a choice to like turn in like rebels when he's like, look, you oppose me or you could help me out. It's like, dude, like, okay. But then he's like, oh, we could, be like Roman power together. It's like, dude, no, and then, by the time we get to the end where he's like, I don't want him to see me as half a man, kind of thing, so I think that Stephen Boyd's moments are like, really strong in this as well. And we'll get into it of like, he was right there for the award. Why did they give it to you, Griffith? Why?
Yeah, I don't quite understand that one either.
Yeah, Stephen Boyd's my favorite secondary. I think he's really good. And I think without that tension between the two of them, I think the movie just doesn't work from the beginning. And then you're left with 3 hours and 30 minutes of a real long slog.
I would have been curious to see how Stephen Boyd would have had, or what kind of a career he would have had over the long haul. But he dropped dead, I think, at 43 of a massive coronary on the golf course.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's what happens. That's all those old Hollywood guys were drinking like fish, smoking, eating probably just red meat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like you said, like Heston's physicality, the fact that, I mean, like you would think, like, because we think of Heston, even the, gun from the cold dead hands, we just think of him as such like a big, large kind of, even in like something like later, like the Omega Man, where he's got like this fortress with all his guns. We're like, yeah, we know Chuck. But the fact that the Boyd matches him, in their scenes beat for beat, especially that's what I feel like is weird, not to fault Haya, but like I feel like Esther's scenes are weaker in comparison. Like Judah doesn't need her romantic part because he's already got that antagonism with Messala, and it's like, oh, they are really crisp. And then when he says, I know you're innocent, I know you didn't do it, yeah, I know it was an accident, he's like, but I can use you to make me look good. And you're like damn, dude, that's cold, man, you're jilted.
Yeah, that's a really good setup as far as the screenwriting. I think the development of that relationship is probably the strongest thing about the movie. it's why I have him in my most charismatic role, because I think his appeal as the bad guy is charismatic.
The movie loses steam when he's not there, which I guess is part of Judah's story. He's like, okay, I had my vengeance. What do I do now?
Yeah. Dad, your best secondary?
I had Charlton Heston also.
Anything to add?
Nothing really to add. I think we covered it. So
today,
Okay.
I think a weaker actor would have been like even worse than Heston, because they would have just had like reactionary, like all the action scenes happening to them, where it's like at least he takes like ownership of them. But it's like, yeah, but there's this background like pool that's happening to him.
I just don't think we have an actor who's, I don't know, between 30 to 40 years old right now who would really fit the role. You know, I'm sure there is somebody out there.
Oh, Glenn Powell.
I love Glenn
I'm not
Powell.
even kidding.
I love Glenn Powell. Putting him
remake it again just for Glenn Powell, because he's not starring in the remake ever, apparently.
Glenn Powell's a man who has seen an iPhone. Like you can't, like, Chuck Heston at least looks, while he doesn't look like he is from, the Middle East, he at least looks of a period in some way.
Mm-hmm.
I still think you could probably get away with like Henry Cavill too, because he at least looks more Jewish than Charlton Heston.
He was in like the Clash of the Titans remake or something, wasn't he? And you're like,
He might have been, yeah.
I guess they all try a sword and sandal picture. Anyway, I don't think they look the part. I think Glenn Powell looks like AI, like somebody composited him out of pieces of Tom Cruise's face. I'm sorry.
I mean, would you really have thought 2 years ago that Paul Mescal was going to be Gladiator 2?
Yeah. I just had this vision of Jason Momoa.
Oh, God. What the fuck, Dad?
Again, he tried like some other kind of epic sword and sandal remake or something. It's like, no. But again, the fault of the CGI, that they have to be all bulky and huge and buff. And for ironic them being so buff, it doesn't look believable. It's like, could you row those oars? I don't know, dude.
Well, I don't want to like have them be an Adonis type. I think Heston being kind of wiry but still muscular actually worked for this, because it would have been somewhat more period accurate.
I mean, probably the closest we have to a movie like this right now is Dune.
Yeah,
so
but
Timmy Chalamet is.
I don't need Willy Wonka playing Judah Ben-Hur.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Maybe he'll end up being a great actor. I don't know, but to me, he still looks like a child.
Yeah, well,
yeah,
it would be like Judah's origin story or something. The first part of the book, he grew up alongside the little carpenter named Jesus. I don't know.
So I gave my most charismatic. What did everybody else have?
I'll go. I mean, mine I think is Jack Dawkins. I think as Quintus Arius, I think you really need to buy that moment of the film where he brings him in and embraces Judah Ben-Hur. And I think he does a really good job selling it. And I think they've got a nice little chemistry to them. They've got a little bromance going on. And I think it really fits.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'll be the outlier. I do like some of the Christ moments. I mean, the idea that you don't see them, that it is the music cues that kind of carry the little beats of, oh, we're not showing his face, but we're showing everybody reacting to him. Like, it's coming, it's hokey, but you're like, but darn, this is kind of good, like, it's the Sermon on the Mount, which in some ways it's so hokey. Like, we're like, oh, it's so big and special, but nah, Judah's not into that. He's walking the other way, and I love the camera work where it's like Jesus is in like the foreground, and even though Judah's walking away from him in the background, he kind of still has to like walk toward Jesus's head, and it's like this visual, and the little beats are playing, and you're kind of like, but I'm gonna get you yet, like, it's okay, you'll see, so I do like those little moments that are kind of peppered across the film, because sometimes in some ways you would almost say the leprosy, the miracle stuff almost feels kind of tacked on at the end. And which is an unfair thing to say, because it also is a very thematical, nice, beautiful thing. But you're like, yeah, it is there through that is something that I guess I feel like it has more rewatchability. That maybe that is where you get a little bit of deeper impact, and maybe particularly now that there is, this hopeful vein that's going through it.
So yeah. Christ is the most charismatic.
Yeah, ironically. Although I don't like the charismatic religious type of style, but at all. But
I don't know. I have is it Haya or Hea?
I think it's Hea.
Harit. Hea Harit. I thought she was just beautiful, and I thought whenever she was in a scene, you just kind of were drawn to her beauty. I think she was just a real eye-opener and kind of stole every scene she was in.
I felt the opposite. I could have.
Yeah. I wasn't going to say it. I don't
Okay.
think the romantic element was necessary. I mean, it's not.
It wasn't necessary.
They actually marry, and she's away with the kids, or that's that, or something.
I thought it was actually necessary, but I didn't think they did a good job at developing the chemistry or really like creating a bond. Like early in the film, he's stunned by her, and like Heston really reacts to it, but her, like, what are you really getting?
Solomon would have just taken the slave girl, and she's kind of like, what? No, I don't, because I like her in other things, but I don't know if it's Heston ego or something was interfering with her stillness. But you're like, okay.
I think one of the problems potentially with her is every scene has to act next to Heston, who is a very big performer. They're to me in very different scenes every single time they're in a scene together. Like he is playing to the rafters, she is playing intimate and small.
Yeah.
I'll say the one thing that was not mentioned that I do want to give a shout out to, I was close to putting this in my most charismatic, but assume somebody would, was Miklos Rocha's score, I think is really wonderful. And it's just a true old school score that, I mean, it's really beautiful, and the movie is peppered with it. If the score didn't work, I think the movie wouldn't be nearly as effective.
No, it definitely weaves together all the disparate pieces and gives it an emotional background or an emotional tinge to a lot of the scenes. Mm-hmm. The one thing, or the one glaring omission, probably that kind of eliminates it from some of this category, though, is the most memorable scene of the entire frickin' film
has zero.
There's zero music to it.
Such the better payoff, though. I think maybe a lot of films today, I guess, forget that. Like even the Two Towers, when the battle scene where they've got like the moment of silence before the explosion goes off at like Helm's Deep with the wall or something. Like the idea that films forget like that silence. Because then when we do get the trumpets playing effectively in camera that he's won, you're like, oh my God, that's right. You realize there was no sound, that it was that intense. And there are other silent scenes when there's dialogue scenes. And then when there's little notes, start up again. You're like, okay. Yeah. The idea that as awesome as the score is, that I guess this is Weiler's credit, that when it knows when to be silent to even make you appreciate the score even more.
And I think that's the hand of like an experienced director. Like early on, I don't know if he would have kind of come to a similar state of mind, but being in it for 20 plus years at that point, you kind of get a better feel for when to pull back and when to push in. And so
Big Country has a great fun score too. Yeah, rousing Western.
Well, like I think Mrs. Miniver does have a decent score with it.
The same thing also has the excellent silent Nothing But the Bombs. Yeah.
Right. So let's move to best scene then. I have nominated Judah Sentenced. Then I have The Battle at Sea. I have the Sheik, or however you want to pronounce it. I have the Chariot Race, and I have Forgiveness, which you could kind of deem the ending. But out of these, what is the best scene? I will all just say right now I have a clean sweep for best scene, favorite scene, and most indelible being the Chariot Race.
I mean, it's hard to argue against the chariot scene. I will say I loved the Battle at Sea. I thought it was really, because I'd always heard about the chariot scene and I'd seen it prior to the film. I didn't know there was a kind of midway battle sequence that was pretty rousing and I thought was pretty incredible. So while I'll say favorite scene is definitely the chariot race, it's the Battle at Sea is really, really, really close behind.
I mean, I think that scene ages a lot more than the other scene because like when they first get on the ship and there's like the sword fight, you could tell it's a bunch of extras just swinging around like plastic swords.
But when you're watching the galley of the ship, like the
Right.
well, the ship flooding, and
Mhm.
he's saving people. I mean, it's pretty remarkable.
Why did
Yeah.
we stop making movies this way? I mean, it's intense. Like, there's that little like triangle window where like there's like another anonymous rower who, like, at first it cuts to it, you see like a ship in the distance, you're like, yeah, okay, no big deal, and then like it's coming close, and then he finally is like, they're gonna ram us, and you're like, all you're doing is seeing like this little itty bitty picture, and it's like some anonymous person is like flipping out, you're like, oh my god, this is intense. And then when they actually just have like the keel and the water, and you're like, what? And everybody's chained, and you're like, oh my god, the setup in this is like so awesome. And it didn't, like, today that would be so over edited. We would have, cut to, overhead pans of like the other ships speeding up, or we would have, 3D panoramics of like, shot this shot from every angle of like the keel crashing through, or even, like it would just be so overdone instead of like people screaming like they're chained in a sinking ship. And yet, I don't know. Yeah, is that my favorite? I'm not sure. I love the rowing scene still. I mean, just the intensity of it. Like, that to me sets up like, yeah, Jack Hawkins' like character's relationship with him. Like, he notices that he's like a stronger person, and he's like testing everybody, and just the way those beats get further and further and further. You're like, this again, the same thing. It gets intense. People dropping their oars, people keeling over, and like, as much as sometimes I don't like the slow scenes, I guess, that come after the big scenes, I think that this film balances very well, like the buildup of like character story, the action, because I mean, before that, like you said, we have the whole prison march, and that first, Christ coming with the dipper, the water, kind of symbolism, which is a very beautiful moment. And then that escalates, up to the battle scene. You're like, wow. And then you're like, wow, this was a really intense, heavy movie.
So any other favorite scenes?
Well, I have the leprosy scene as a favorite of mine. I mean, I had the battle at sea as being the best scene, and my favorite scene was leprosy. And I guess more than anything, it's a sentimental point, because it came back to me watching that scene with my mother and her sobbing. So I guess it's more sentimental than it is actually understanding the value of the scene individually.
Because, like, as much as I said, geez, it seems like the lepers are kind of the side story. Like, and maybe today, it may have been better done. That would have strengthened the characters better. Or maybe we would have cut back to them. Like, wow, it's been 3 years since we've seen Judah. They don't know that he's all been rowing, this whole time. And it's like 5 years and the house is dilapidated. We don't get to see what kind of happens in between on their side. But then you get the irony that Esther's been following this rabbi, and then the mother and sister, when they're at like the Via Dolorosa, they say, it's okay, that we didn't get to speak to him. They're like, just his look of peace or something. Like the fact that they, already kind of experienced their faith and their peace with it, even when Judah still maybe hasn't gotten the clue yet. So yeah, there are individual moments where you're like, oh, it's getting me. It's choking me up still. Yes. On one hand, you could say, is the movie heavy-handed, where it does have like, yes, the water will cleanse. Here's the blood coming through there. Everything's going to be okay. But yet you're like, damn it, that's hope. Like, oh, I needed that. I needed that so much.
So, question, Dana, the leprosy scene, the end leprosy, because there's, to me, a couple.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, like when they're in the prison and they realize it and there's the shocked reaction.
No,
so it's the reveal
in
of
the
leprosy.
Valley of the Lepers, because that's the scene that I just remember him, them taking the food down and him going down in there trying to find them and such. And it was like all of a sudden this, how you have a sense where all of a sudden you have a memory that you had not thought about I bet you I hadn't thought of that in 25, 30 years at least.
A certain smell or a song evokes a memory.
Yeah. And that came back to me.
Now, we haven't really discussed it terribly, like, in depth, but I was surprised at how much the chariot scene had me, like, riveted. Like, I did not remember it being that intense and, frankly, that good. But that's why it swept all three of my categories, including most indelible moment. So does anyone not have it as most indelible?
I mean, the technical achievements alone. I mean, I guess to think, like, yeah, there were epics before and after, but like none of them were like this before. Like you almost could say this kind of even though cinema was already changing. I mean, like we said, things like Some Like It Hot, the Hays Code being over, like eventually the studio system kind of falling. But it was like this kind of movie is like the defining moment of like this is how movies changed. I mean, because yeah, there were previous like when they had like the silent movie that was messy, or like before that they would have like chariots like on the stage in a play, like rotating on like a treadmill or something. Like it was like, oh, just look at like a single spectacle. But the way this is edited with like cutting to like the blades on the wheels, and then like whipping, and then the reactions in the crowd, and then leaping over the fallen chariots and people rushing to get up, like the way it is, it's not over edited. It is very like amplifying the intensity, which again I feel like modern films lost the ability to do that.
And there's so many shots to where you feel like that's definitely Charlton Heston on the chariot. Like they can't disguise it. And then I think the shocking thing, especially from a 1959 perspective, was there was the 2 times where people fell and then were just trampled.
Yeah.
And I believe there's certainly some beautiful editing going on there, which on the whole, I think this movie's edited. We could lose 45 minutes, but the micro editing within scenes is so efficient. And just watching those people get trampled and falling under the horses, under the chariot is really, I think, effective and stark.
Today we would know it's CGI. We'd be like, oh, that's not really him when he's like the chariot's going up over the rest of them and he's flying through the air. We'd be like, oh, we know that's a digital double. But yeah, to know that it's like a person did that stunt, you're like, oh. And they just and there's no jump cut. They're like, they filmed it in like one day.
Did anybody catch the stunt that was taken right from Stagecoach where he's crawling down through the horses? I mean, that's ended up becoming the scene in Indiana Jones under the truck, but it's the same principle.
And on this behind the scenes, there was like an hour-long set that had like so many directors of like, yeah, I borrowed this scene, I stole this scene from this movie, I recreated this scene, like just it was like the legacy or something, and it was all modern directors talking about like, no, I stole that verbatim because it's so good.
Yeah. So that looks like a good spot for our second break. We will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, and before we get to the Stanley Rubric in a minute, if you're ever curious about our Master Greatest Movies of All Time list that has every graded movie we've ever discussed on the show, there's a link in the episode description of every episode of this show, or you can go to RonnieDuncanStudios.com and find it as the top entry on the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast show page. That is the grades we've done so far for all 215 movies we've graded, and we continue to add more each week. Make sure to check that out as we go and follow along. Also, you can follow each individual episode on our website as well. It has the notes for each individual episode with all of our scores, category nominations, and the individual factoids for each episode of the show. Just click the link in the episode description of this episode or go to RonnieDuncanStudios.com/Gmote podcast to find that. Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Yes. Peter Tork, 77, American musician and actor, a member of the Monkees. Tony Todd, 69, American actor, Candyman, Final Destination, and Platoon.
And I will also add, for anybody that's played the Spider-Man 2 video game from, I think, last year, he was the voice of Venom. So if you're a gamer out there.
And Peter Tork, anybody here know who it was down to Peter Tork and one other musician for the last member of the Monkees? Anybody know who that was?
I'm assuming the other person's famous.
Yes, he is.
Bob Dylan.
No.
William Shatner.
No, Stephen Stills.
When they were auditioning to create a band for a TV show.
Yes, it was Peter Tork or Stephen Stills. And Stephen Stills, I think, kind of caught on a little bit better with Crosby, Stills, and Nash.
And so we remember these here fondly for their contributions with a moment of silence in their honor. Thank you. Let's make the weekly awkward transition to best funniest lines. I will begin with Sextus. You can break a man's skull, you can arrest him, you can throw him in a dungeon, but how do you control what's up here? How do you fight an idea?
I have a silly one, kind of. It's funny that you say that, Sextus. There's is his name Marcus or Darius? The other man who's with Messala all the time. He's just standing beside him and runs to him at the chariot. Drusus, thank you. He's the one who has the reaction shot with the torch with the lepers, and he just he seems like his little BFF little friend. So sometimes his little moments where he's just standing next to Messala, like when Masala's arguing with Judah, his little moments kind of crack me up more than the burping stuff. But no, funny story. Mine is the it was an accident. Many years ago when I was in school, I don't know, we were in home ec or science or something, and something spilled or something, and I did that. It was an accident, not expecting anybody to know that it was Ben-Hur. And I did have one friend who did recognize and notice that. So every other time something funny happened, he'd go, "It was an accident." And even not that long ago on Facebook or something, I think I was posting about Ben-Hur or Twitter or something, and he responded to me, "It was an accident." It was just this silly, stupid thing that I guess shouldn't be a laughable moment in the movie, but part of you's like, that was a little over the top. Sure.
In a purely Machiavellian moment, Messala, by condemning without hesitation an old friend, I shall be feared.
Sheik Ilderim, one god, that I can understand, but one wife, that is not civilized. It is not generous.
That line was said, and I looked at my wife and said, no.
And then he goes and goes in the tent with the horses, and he's like, "The horses are my true beauties." You're like, well, wait a second.
Maybe he just likes being a bottom. I don't know. Quintus Arius, your eyes are full of hate, 41. That's good. Hate keeps a man alive. It gives him strength.
What is your name, 41?
Anyone else?
Yeah, Judah Ben-Hur. If you were not a bride, I would kiss you goodbye. Esther. If I were not a bride, there would be no goodbyes to be said.
I'm out.
You're out? I have one left. Judah Ben-Hur. If I cannot persuade them, that does not mean I will help you murder them. Besides, you must understand this, Messala. I believe in the past of my people and in their future. Messala. Future? You are a conquered people. Judah Ben-Hur, you may conquer the land, you may slaughter the people, but that is not the end. We will rise again.
Compared to his, it was an accident. By the time you actually get to the end, where Judah does kind of get the clue, and he kind of says, what did he do to deserve this? And then you're kind of like, oh.
I've got one more. It's Messala. Sextus, you ask how to fight an idea. Well, I'll tell you how, with another idea.
All right. Are we ready to move to the Stanley rubric then? Legacy is up first. This is a category that describes the legacy of the movie after the initial 5 years in which it was released. So we're talking roughly 1964 to today. What is the legacy of this movie shared between the industry and the audience at large? We divide the category 5 and 5 for a total of 10 points. Dad, would you like to go first or second?
I'll go first. I think for the industry, the fact that this is still on some of the greatest movies of all time list, the fact that it's under preservation, that it basically saved MGM. I think for an industry point of view, it's a 5. When I come to the public, though, I have to go down. I think it's held in some revere by cinemaphiles, but I don't think the general public even thinks about this film anymore. I think it's lost a lot of its luster. Maybe it has some level of revere for old guys like me. So I gave it a half point up from where I normally would have, because I do think it's a generational thing. So I went with a 3 for the public. Otherwise, I would have been a 2.5.
I agree with you wholeheartedly on the 5 for the industry. I don't think there's really too much argument against that. I think where we're going to come down, as we do most weeks with this category, is going to be in the audience side. And I think to a degree, it's going to be bartered on how much you think this still seeps into culture. I do think that this is one of the original true sword and sandal epics in a way that most other things are not. There is a part of me that wonders if too many people, if they haven't seen this before, would compare it to Gladiator, because I shared that thought, Peterson. But at the same time, I kind of come down that I think almost universally, I mean, there will be exceptions. Peterson was one until this week, where you haven't seen Ben-Hur. But for the majority of film fans, I think you've probably seen it a couple of times, maybe a half dozen times, because of its importance generally, how much it was impactful at the time in what it was doing, how well it was made. And even though its length is daunting to a degree, because it won Best Picture, it's also got that extra staple on it that it's like a completionist type of thing. You're crossing this movie off of a ton of lists by just watching it. You're probably knocking it off multiple AFI lists and the Best Picture list, and probably the IMDb top 250, it might be in there, even though it's not necessarily recent. You're just, by completing this movie, you're knocking this off of a ton of lists. So I had it at a 4. I have a 9.
I agree. I mean, to me, it's a 5. I guess in recent comparison, you'd have to say this is something like Iron Man, saving studios and redefining, cinema as we know it, maybe now for good or ill. But the idea that it's like this, saved MGM, this, changed cinema, the technical mastery, the fact that we're just now getting back to, I guess, with that Blu-ray restoration, the actual true technical mastery, because cameras or something at the time couldn't fully, they had to shuffle around the huge 70 millimeter cameras or something, so technically achievement wise, industry achievement wise, 5/11 to me. The only thing about the public, I guess I would say 4, because it's, I guess, up until the streaming era, you could still catch this on TV. It was like there was maybe slightly more accessibility to it, of that, oh, hey, that is a big, huge movie. That's supposed to be a must-see for a reason. Hey, look, now it's coming on TV. Now's the time I can watch it. Compared to now, where I feel like people would have to seek it out, even though I do think it is must-see definitely for a reason. But maybe it's becoming tougher for people to find. Or, unless you're a cinephile going by a list, they'd say, why should I watch an old movie like this? But it's definitely worth it.
Well, and I don't think it feels its own age. Like, similar to Gone with the Wind, I think it's so well made in the technical that it feels like it's a movie from probably 10 years after that it was actually made. But I will also say, for those that are interested and need to check it off of their Gmote bingo card, our office staff, when polled this morning as to how many had actually seen this film, it was like a good half, if not like 60% of our staff had seen this movie, which I was rather surprised by given its relative age.
The irony, as we're saying who has seen it or who hasn't, but like Peterson said, people have seen pieces of it. Everybody recognizes that a clip of the chariots when they see it. So it's like it's still in like the back of like the cultural kind of iconography.
So what's your final number, Kristin?
9 for that.
9. Okay. Go ahead, Peterson.
So easily 5 on the industry. I think that's really inarguable. I'm going to go 3.5 on the general public, though. So I think, I do think...
You had to give me some weird decimal numbers.
I'm not doing the math.
We go 3.623.
Fuck you.
No.
The 316.
No, well, I do think this is a revered film in a lot of ways. I'm sure it still plays every Easter on TCM.
Yep.
But, who's sitting down and watching the entire thing? I know when I watch this again, because I'll watch this movie again, I am not going to queue it up from the beginning. Like, I can probably skip the first, 30 minutes. So I'll probably jump in on TCM. And that's a taste thing, probably.
Sure.
But I think, so the general public, I think it's an easy 3.5 for me, because and I would say every year that goes by, that general public's going to go down a little bit.
For any movie that's like aged or that's older, that's pretty much for all of them. Like, you'd be surprised at a certain point how many people have not seen Citizen Kane, even though we think of it as this like great, endearing, cross-cultural section of movie. At a certain point in time, I may age into a group where there are a bunch of little kids who have no idea what The Wizard of Oz is.
I don't know.
It feels unfathomable, but...
So, Tom, I think the one difference, something like The Wizard of Oz, is we are still getting versions of that. And I mean, I'm going to be taking my kids. I'm taking my kids to the early access screening to Wicked because they love the musical and they want to go see it. So we're going to get iterations of that story for generations. I mean, they made a remake to Ben-Hur like 8 years ago, 9 years. I don't remember how long ago. And nobody saw it. It made no money. And I looked and I was just curious. I was like, what's the runtime of that one? It's like exactly 2 hours.
And the irony in comparison to something like The Prince of Egypt, which was a good movie, which, animated, it was more kid oriented, but a different element. But it was like, no, but it's a good movie. Compared to this, everything I've seen for this Wicked, I'm like, where's the lighting? What the cinematography? Like, it looks so terrible compared to, I guess kids today could not understand the going from black and white, Dorothy opening that door to color, but it's like the difference in just vividness and construction. And you're like, oh, that's sad.
So a funny story about the black and white. I was listening to the Blank Check podcast and whatever David Lowery was on, they were just, it was a David Lynch thing. Oh, I don't know, whatever it was. David Lowery, the director, is on, and he's talking about when he first saw The Wizard of Oz, his family had a black and white TV set, and he never understood that it moved to color. So he's like, I just watched this thing, and I was like, why is she freaking out over Oz?
All right, so that is a 8.63 average between the four of us. Thanks, Peterson. Couldn't make the math easy. Impact and significance. I'll make mine pretty easy. It's a full 10. The audience was well out for this one. It made a ton of money. It was more than double the next closest movie. It was huge in the moment. The industry recognized it, making it one of the highest nominated films ever. And I do think that you could probably add a little bit of an asterisk given that they were still separating color versus black and white. And a lot of its technical wins were in the color criteria compared to, black and white. So it wasn't even competing against like some of the other close films of that year in a particularly good year. But this was overwhelmingly the biggest movie of that moment. So it's a full 10.
Agreed. Simply. I mean, I still think it's a master achievement. I think for people who are interested in filmmaking, getting into filmmaking, it's like, watch this movie, because there's just the massiveness that you're amazed that they, I guess, considering how long it is, like how perfect the film turned out to be, just a masterpiece. And just, I almost wonder if they re-release this today, I wonder what the box office numbers would be. Because I still think it would have that kind of allure, that appeal, that there would be people who'd say, I want to see the chariot race on the big screen.
Well, when you consider the rise of right-wing Christian films that are going on right now, I think it would do very well.
So does anyone not have a 10 or have anything else to add to this? Because otherwise we should just move on.
No, I mean, I'll easily add 10. And what I will say, Kristin, you started talking about this a little bit, but to me, I think you need to sit down every director of a Marvel movie, every director of a superhero movie and say, all right, watch the chariot race. You see how they edit this? You see how they film this and they let you watch an action?
You see how they light a scene with two people in a room?
But like the chariot scene, especially, it's like, look how they show action. They don't cut. They let you see something happening, and they let the tension build from that. So I think, easily this is a 10 on the legacy side.
All right, so the math is very easy on this one. Even Dad could do it.
10.
We have a 10 average between the four of us.
Have you ever had a 10 for all four?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I don't know for all four, but we've had a 10 on impact and significance before.
Okay.
With at least 3 people. I think we did that for Jaws, is one I can easily recall. Novelty. Now, this is a category that is defined by the novelty of the original concept of the idea. That can mean a lot of different things. Often we usually mean subject matter or story, but in some ways you can take the technical mastery and artistry behind it, and then the 5 points we give for the execution of the idea. And one way I will exemplify that here is, this is a remake of an original movie based on a book that had been at one time very popular and was at least somewhat well known. So I don't think from an originality standpoint that this is anything more than pretty down the middle. I have that at a 2.5. But I think this is one of the best executed films of that era in its total mastery of almost everything. If you nitpick the acting, I could maybe see a half point down to like a 4.5, but I have a 7.5 for that.
I will go next just to further this, okay? For the execution, I have a 4.5, and I gave it a half point down on execution for the simple fact is I think they could have cut some pieces out of this film.
Fair.
Okay?
Fair.
And it would have been a tighter, more entertaining film. It dragged at times. From originality, I think all the points you made, except one more. You couldn't even get an original actor. You had to hire Moses.
Fair enough. So where did you come down on that?
I came down with 2 for originality. So
you're
I'm
at
at
a
a
6.5?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say 3, I think, for the originality, because I mean, yeah, it was a very popular book. It had been a play, and the remake, and there were sword and sandal films before it also. But I would still say 4, because it's just, but this is the definitive kind of, if you don't see any other biblical epic, I think this is the one to see.
So you have a 7?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Peterson.
So I'm going to go 4 for execution. And just the one thing I will mention is Hail Caesar is making fun of this movie. Not making fun of it. I mean, kind of poking fun at it. They shoot Christ in this film. So that goes back to that legacy. And then for the other half, I would say I'm going to go for a 2. And that is just because originality-wise, I don't think there's much original to this story. Whatever is original is in the execution of it. So I will say, there are moments of this that feel really original, but you lose an hour, and I think it's maybe that even goes up 1.5 points for me. But so I think 2 and 4. So 6 overall for me.
So that's a 6.75 average between the 4 of us. Classicness. Dad, I will let you lead, but before we do, just defining the category. Classicness has meant a lot of things over time. For the most part, the easiest way to comprehend this one is, has the subject matter, the technical aspects, and other things that go into the movie aged well? Or have they not? It's why we normally start at our baseline 7, because there are more ways to take off points from a movie, for especially an older movie such as this, than there are usually in the other direction. And so with that, Dad, take it away.
Start at 7. I'm going to give it 1 point down because on the ship scene, because it's clearly models on a water tank. Okay. But I'm going to give it 1 point back up for the chariot scene because of its just absolutely brilliantly shot footage. I'm going to give it a point down for the fact that we have a English actor playing an Arab, and we have the German version of a Jew being a blonde Charlton Heston playing a Jew. So I'm giving it a point down for those two. Then I give it a point back up for the fact that it did have as central figures in a time frame that was very male dominant, female characters that were instrumental to the overall story arc. The girlfriend lesser so, but the mother and the sister were important aspects of it, and it was a very male dominant time frame, and it reflects that. So I come all the way back to arrive where I started at a 7.
That was a lot of math to get to the same spot.
Algebra.
Go ahead, Peterson.
I think I'm going to come right down on 8 for this. And where it loses some of the steam for me is I just think you can lose so much of the Christ stuff. And if you really focused in on just Judah Ben-Hur, I think this would be a 10. So that to me is an easy 8.
Can I still give it a 10?
Sure.
Yeah. All the problems that we have with it, the heavy-handed kind of doctrine, any of the uneven, poorly paced things, or any of the scripting problems, the blackface, all the problems that we have with the movie, I still think are necessary to its classicness, because even the same thing as This Is Why I Love the Searchers, it's a very racist depiction in this film, and so I think that all the problems with the film also say something about the filmmaking and the culture and society at the time. So to me, that's also why it's an essential kind of time capsule that, okay, you need to study, like, look how they were advancing these filmmaking achievements. Look at these problems with the film. These are why they have these things in the movie. So I still think that kind of classicness in itself is what's essential to study.
I will say Hugh Griffith does kind of look like Jimmy Fallon as Eddie Murphy.
Yeah.
Or is it Chris Rock? Eddie Murphy, isn't it?
You're like, he is good. He is fun. He is like a positive push support that Judah needs. But you're like, dude, why did they have to do that there? Like, oh, okay. We didn't need like minstrel funny, like, ouch. No.
It definitely feels as weird as Alec Guinness playing an Arab in Lawrence of Arabia, but it is a product of the time.
Mm-hmm.
I did give a point off for that, just personally on it. And I mean, starting at our typical 7, I have a +2 for timelessness on the overall film, because there are pieces of this that I do think are thrilling, entertaining. Yes, there is a little bit of the editing that could probably come down, but I give that more for novelty and execution piece of this. But I didn't really feel, other than the chore of actually having enough time to finish the film, that I really felt its length, even though I had to kind of watch it over 2 days. But that was because I was doing it in between other things. I guess I also didn't find the Christ-like aspect of this as hokey, partly because I think the overall theme of the film is actually aged well, in an era especially where just coming out of the presidential election, the country is as divided as it can be. Preaching a little bit of forgiveness and understanding of each other maybe is a good thing right now. And yes, it might be done in some weird packaging, but I'm not going to necessarily decry a movie that's trying to promote good overall themes. And then I have an additional +1 for the set piece of the chariot race, which I think almost by itself, I was so impressed again by this that it could probably be a +2, but I also ended up at a 10. So that is an 8.75 between the 4 of us. Let's go to rewatchability. And this is a category that really has no pure definition. This is very subjective. We've had a whole bunch of people basically give their same version of the same kind of test, whether it's the hotel room test or it's the Kieran B test, finding it on cable or streaming. Anything you kind of want to use in this, it's just subjective to how much are you actually going to want to put this film on at any point in time. And if you find it on ever, are you going to want to sit and stay and watch a few minutes, a good portion, several scenes, a section of the movie? Do you stop your day and potentially watch through to the end of the film? So we will start with our guests. Kristin, what do you have for rewatchability?
I would still say 9, I think, because yes, it's long. Yes, it's a chore. If you have to be committed to it, if you're actually seeking out to find it. But if it's on casually, I definitely think it's worth it. I mean, I think there might have been a time in my parents' house we probably did watch this, the once a year for Easter. And yeah, the length is the problem. But yet, even as I said, some of those slow scenes, you're like, okay, this is a break. The score is playing. It's pleasant to have in the background. that it is positive. And yes, you have to be in the mood to say, I want to be moved, I guess, in a way, because yes, you could have serious moments with the hopefulness getting kind of emotional, but then you could also say, I want to see these really exciting scenes. Like, you become like, it's one of those, maybe you think you can put it on the background, but then there are scenes where you're like, wait, all they're doing is walking and he's dropping from thirst, and you're like, this is intense. So yeah, I definitely think that it's still rewatchable, still worth seeing. And I think it gets better the more times you see it, where maybe you're able to pay attention more, pick up different things with different scenes, and it gives something different, I think, every time. Like I said, this time I was getting a little emotional, and you're right, maybe that is circumstances recently, but so yeah, the fact that even though times change, that the movie can still say something, can still reach an audience.
Peterson, as our resident Ben-Hur virgin, what is your immaculate reception on this one?
So,
did you see Mary in there for a few seconds?
What I'll come at this with is a few things. I do find that there is a lot of compelling scenes. There's a lot of meat on a lot of these scenes, and obviously the chariot race. I think the battle scene. Really, anytime Judah Ben-Hur is interacting with people, I find really compelling. And I just don't know if I'm going to put it back on, though. I feel as though I got a lot out of the first viewing. And I'll watch this at some other point in my life. But I just don't think I'm going to say, you know what, I'm going to cue that up tomorrow. Or even, I'm going to cue it up this Easter. That might also go down to the fact that I'm not particularly religious. But a lot of works of faith kind of really speak to me and I think are really powerful. That's works of art, music, film. I think, Tom, we were talking about the other day how good silence is. Martin Scorsese's Silence.
Yes. I'm a big defender of that one.
To me, that is a story about true Christian convictions. And this, I think, is it's grafted onto it. So I think there is some power in there, and I do think there is a really beautiful message in the idea of forgiveness, especially with what Ben-Hur's been through. But I just, I don't know how often I'm going to return to this. So I think I'm going to go to 4.5 on the rewatchability.
Ironically, I will say there probably are better religious movies.
Yeah.
If you're looking for full-on religious aspects, and ironically, I probably would watch the Ten Commandments more likely at Passover. That's to me an easier go-to kind of movie.
So I'll say another movie I've not seen. The
Really?
biblical epics.
Really?
The biblical epics are ones I've not seen.
Yeah, and people think it's on at Easter. No, it's on like the Saturday before Passover, like on ABC for like the past 60 some years.
A movie I have certainly seen
And my husband says this to me every single time. Don't you have a box set of that? Why are we watching this for 6 hours with commercials? I'm like, no, it's the experience, man. Again, it's on in the background. It's really pleasant.
I will say, Ben-Hur seems like a really good folding laundry watch. Because you're like, you know what? I can check out of this scene.
Mm-hmm.
And then you pop back in. You're like, all right, I'm going to stop folding laundry for 20 minutes and watch the chariot scene. Yeah.
It's ironic you say that because I exactly did that thing. I watched and folded laundry to Ben-Hur.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We give you these 10 commandments.
Thanks, Mel.
You're welcome. Dad, what did you have?
Okay, this is one where I'll watch it again, but I'm not sitting down and watching it from beginning to end. I can see myself, there's going to be a rare occasion. I can envision a time where, for example, your grandmother is home and we can't find, let's put on Ben-Hur. Oh, I haven't seen that since I was like 14 or 15. And boom, all of a sudden we're watching Ben-Hur. Other than that, I could see putting it on and playing part of it and stopping, going back to it later, or fast forwarding through like the middle half hour, getting to the chariot seat. So I'm at a 5.5.
It can be a Christmas movie too for Grandma.
I actually would not be surprised if my grandmother has never seen this film. Like, I would not be shocked one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, she would have been 14, 15 when it came out. So, my mom's long gone. It's my wife's, my mother-in-law. And she kind of has the same ability to remember movies she has seen that my wife has, which is never remember that she ever saw a film. And then films she hasn't seen, she argues she's seen. And I'm going, I don't know, I've never seen it. Did you see it with some other guy?
I should have asked my dad if he saw this in theaters, because he would have been 10.
Yeah, they'd been about the right age.
And
it would have been the kind of film that whole families were going to.
Yeah.
Again, there was probably a time where it was exciting for the whole family to get together and see, oh, no, it's coming on TV now. Now's the time to watch. So this difference of the prestige of having to wait for the excitement to see it, and now maybe losing a little accessibility to it, but it's worth seeking out, I think, for sure.
Yeah.
I definitely, as I mentioned before, was enthralled by this version of it, or this most recent watch, and I think this is the third or fourth time I've seen it. It's the most I've enjoyed the film up to that point. I think there is something to be said that maybe the more often you watch it, the more you can kind of get into it. But I thought certain pieces, as has been mentioned before already, were enthralling. There are some moments that it dips. Again, the last like 45 minutes where it's past the chariot race, it starts to drag. And there are some points to this. I mean, I don't know where you'd cut in order to not lose the theme of forgiveness, but there are aspects where you could shorten certain scenes and take out some pieces and probably cut it up. I don't know how. I'm not that skilled. Well, I shouldn't say that. I am a skilled editor, but it's at podcasts. It's not at like full-length feature films from 1959. But I do think that this is an important film, and I'd be willing to put it on again. It's just the length is going to be the biggest hindrance. So I have it at a 3 for putting it on of my own volition. And as far as like if I found it on somewhere, if it's on TCM on a random night or you come across it, it depends on which part it's in. If it's about the sea battle or about the time when he's doing like the battle rowing, ramming speed, some of that stuff, I'll probably sit and watch 20 minutes to a half an hour because it's in a really good section of the film. If it's around the chariot race or some of the certain interactions between Messala and Judah, I will sit and watch it. Like, I actually don't mind. The buildup is a little bit slow for about the first 10 minutes, but after that, I actually do think that the film works pretty well about the point where the accident happens and you have all the fallout from that. But outside of that, in certain slow moments, I don't know if I would necessarily stop and do too much else. So I have this at roughly a 4. I have a 7. So that's going to give us a 6.5 average between the four of us. So to repeat the categories, we had an 8.63 for legacy, a total of 10 for impact and significance. For novelty, 6.75, classicness an 8.75, rewatchability was a 6.5, and audience score, Google users, we had an 86%, and Rotten Tomato users giving us an 89% for an 8.75, for a final total of 49.38, and currently placing it on our list between 2001: A Space Odyssey and Reservoir Dogs for number 70 overall.
That'd be a wild triple feature. That'd be
big difference.
Yeah.
As always, if you have any comment on our scoring, good or bad, you can write us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on any of our socials at GMOTepodcast, or you can find us at our website, RonnieDuncanStudios.com/GMOTepodcast. Let's move to remaining questions. How the fuck is Messala not instantly dead from being trampled? I know it doesn't work for the story, but my God, it doesn't make any frickin' sense.
I was thinking that this time, and yet at the same instance, I was like, his raspy voice and his gasping and the way they hold him up. At first, I'm like, oh my God, this is preposterous. But then I'm like, damn, he's really good in this. He really is hanging on just for Judah. And the way it's shot, where he's got his little gasping in the front, and we do see the shadow of where Judah does walk in, and you're just like, damn, dude. It's like he's like, no, he's hanging on for Judah. That's
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's like somebody getting shot in a movie now, where it's like,
oh yeah,
they got a few minutes. They got a few minutes left.
Mm.
Narratively wise, like I get that you have to include that because you need that final confrontation between the two of them. But still, like the way he gets run over, you're like, no fucking way.
I've seen too many things, too many accidents, too many situations. The human will is a lot greater than you think, and the loss of human will is a lot greater than you think, which is why spouses who have been together for 55, 60 years, one passes and the other goes in a matter of days or months because they lose that will. But the same spirit, people will hang on, which is, I think, one of the reasons why we have huge in memoriams lists after Christmas. They hold on for Christmas because it's family time.
Yeah. And Tom, think about it. Jimmy Carter said he wanted to stay alive for one thing, so he could cast his vote for Kamala Harris, right?
Well, nobody tell Jimmy.
Yeah.
Let him pass away.
He's been used to disappointments.
That's fair. I mean, he gave us Ronald Reagan, so there is that.
Yeah.
Second point. How long are the fucking laps on that chariot race? I mean, it looks like they're going down like a full motor speedway with how much is going on in between laps.
Oh my gosh. I'm having a senior moment here because I used to be interested in like historically Roman stuff. I feel like that those dolphin like points going around the rounds have something to do with like the length or the distance or something, like how many like fathoms or something, so to speak, or something, or they're old like cubit measures or something. But you're like, yeah, man, like even though and that's, I guess, an editing thing that's really fancy about it, is that we've got a visual point of, we know how many things they're going around the races. And it's so funny, even something like Goofy Cars today, has like, the spin around, the cut to the crowd, the flags, the pit stops, so yeah, it's like at some point you're like, wow, this is long, but at the same point you're like, it was too short.
I will say, if I was going to nitpick one thing about the chariot scene, it is that as you're watching it, you're like, they probably should have been
wrapped it up
to the next lap sooner.
Yeah, because like that track is not very big.
Yeah,
no, it's not huge, and it turns pretty quickly.
Yeah,
but you look, it's all in the magic movies. You don't really care about it when you're watching it. But
they're
it's one of those
making a
things,
left turn.
Yeah, when you think about it in hindsight, you're like, that's a little silly.
Well, I thought it was interesting that, of course, we're going counterclockwise, just as we're doing in NASCAR or IndyCar. And I'm like,
yeah, even though in ancient
is that because
Rome,
that's what people were used to seeing? Or was that really traditionally Roman?
Yeah, we're American. We drive on like the left side. But ancient Rome, they actually drove on like the British side, the right side. So you're like, yeah, is it backwards? Oh, well.
I don't know. My daughter, Tom's sister, is a classics major, and I'm sure she will, if we ask her, pontificate for several minutes on Roman chariot racing.
Yeah, let's not do that for next week's Ask Sarah Anything. We'll be here yet, like, by the time it's Christmas.
I'll wait till Thanksgiving.
Yeah, that's fine. I tried to show her Gladiator, and she just about had to come apart.
300? Well, there's
no,
some historical liberties.
No, I'm not going there. Not happening.
Thanksgiving's already got to be tough enough this year.
Yeah.
Well, yes, but regardless. Any other remaining questions?
Do you know why we didn't get a scene of Messala and Judah Ben-Hur like oiling each other's backs to really get that homoerotic edge?
They should have had their meeting in the bath. No, but I totally love like the phallicness when they're doing the spears at the beams.
Yeah.
You're like they're basically like measuring each other up. Like, okay,
Only thing missing was the urinal.
mm-hmm. Ancient Rome, they would have been sitting side by side having a chit chat.
Wait, the urinal in ancient Rome.
They were just like rows with like open kind of outhouses. Everybody just sat next to each other. So
Yeah.
It's like going to a baseball game or something.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, a trough.
A big trough,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, ask me sometime about the most bizarre bathroom I've ever seen in my entire life.
You've described it on the show before. People will have to go back and listen to the catalog, but it's been in there multiple times.
I'm sure.
And yet they had indoor plumbing.
Fair.
That's true.
So
Power of the aqueduct.
one question I would have is, this movie is now 65 years old. Hollywood doesn't really have a lot of original ideas anymore. Do you think they come back to this in the next 5 years, let's say, and make a 10-part miniseries or limited series or something like that?
I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibility. If you put like HBO's money behind it, sure.
Yeah.
Or one zealous kind of person, I suppose, like Mel Gibson's doing Passion of the Christ 2. And it's like, gee, if only you would have, if there was material you could have adapted, right after the Passion of the Christ, some other texts that were right there for the taking. Ugh.
Well, I've never read the book, but from when I was reviewing, the movie only comprises 2 of the 4 parts of the book.
Yeah, it's like Lord of the Rings if you didn't do like the back half.
Yeah.
So it would be potentially ripe for it, but I don't know if you're going to get too many liberal institutions doing all of the Jesus crossovers. So I want to thank both of our guests for being on with us for this episode. But just quickly before we let them go, Peterson, what are you working on and where can people find you?
Yeah, check me out at psychodrivein.com and War Starts Midnight podcast. And then check me out at Peterson W. Hill at Instagram, X, and Blue Sky.
And you will be back with us for one more episode this season of Up in the Air in a few weeks. But until then...
It's a very different movie from Ben-Hur.
Well, frankly, this is the most lighthearted movie that he's done so far. Fight Club, Parasite, and Gone Girl.
Gone Girl's pretty lighthearted, though.
Her could be lighthearted. It could be positive.
Yeah.
But Kristin, what are you working on and where can people find you?
My IG Instagram is KBatsCraft. That's actually where I do more Halloween and DIY kind of articles and things like that, which I haven't done as much, actually, because I've actually been doing too many guest pods. At InSessionFilm.com, actually, I have more horror things, I think, coming out. I do horror all the time just because October's over. It doesn't matter to me. So, Therefore Review on Twitter, Blue Sky. I think I've got something TV. Oh, I did some Dark Shadows things at Keith Loves Movies. So Dark Shadows is always, yes, the gift that keeps on giving. It's certainly got enough episodes.
Excellent. And all the links for our guests will be up on the website as well as in the show notes for this episode. Dad, any quick remaining thoughts for the week?
I would just indicate that I got to see Conclave yesterday and was absolutely blown away by it. It was very well done. It was extremely well acted, and it was extremely entertaining. It was 2 hours of absolute fun, and I have not had as much fun in a movie in a while.
I might be seeing it tomorrow with my wife. I'm excited to see it. Question, because you hear a bunch of Catholic archbishops sitting around trying to elect the new pope. You don't think fun?
Oh,
it's
like intrigue through the entire thing, and it is just, there are a lot of plot twists, and yeah.
So they're catty.
Yeah, not just catty, almost Machiavellian. And yeah, and it's...
As for me, I know that I awfully complain, at least the last several months, about my encumbered schedule. But I will be outside of a normal project or a movie watching project for the time being, and pretty much have unconstructed free space to watch what I want for the first time in like 6 months. So I'm going to enjoy that, even while I'm doing some of my finals prep, because I'll need some downtime in between. And I may just watch some really mindless bullshit. So that's going to be really fun to like not have to worry about watching something for somebody else or something else and not care whether I have to really pay attention that much. It'll be glorious.
You're not going to watch The Brutalist.
I might. It's probably going to be the only time that I'm going to actually be able to get it in before March or whatever else, because by the time the next semester starts up, I'll be back in the churn again. And this is probably the most time off I'm going to have from school every year, is this like 4 weeks for Christmas break. Although if you tack in like Thanksgiving and such, because one of my classes is going to finish up a little early with that, most times I'm going to have 3 finals waiting for me. And then it's going to be like, even in May, I have a couple of weeks off and then it goes right into summer classes. So there's not even that much of a break between that. It's like a calm in between the storms. But
I love it.
How much law school do you have left?
this is my first semester, so I have like 3.5 years.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
But that's going to do it for us this week. Thank you for listening. It's a weird case from the start. A case with a hole in the center. A donut. Next week, for our 238th episode, we welcome back 5-time club member Sarah Duncan and new guest Liz Arnold of Liz in a Movie for another 2019 film in Knives Out for its 5th anniversary. Written and directed by Ryan Johnson, music by Nathan Johnson, starring Daniel Craig, Chris Evans, Anna de Armas, Jamie Lee Curtis, Michael Shannon, Don Johnson, Toni Collette, Lakeith Stanfield, and Christopher Plummer in his final role. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in our fun. You can also email the show at thenewryandeckstudios.com or at greatestalltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com, or find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GModePodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ryan Decken Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our technical provider and distributor is Captivate FM.